Our next speaker is Ashok Bhargava, who's the Director of the Energy Division of the East Asia Development Bank, I'm sorry. And he's going to bring us another perspective that's been hinted on in various other presentations, and that's the issue of financing early stage projects. Ashok has been involved in the ADP in a number of projects, including innovative first-of-a-kind low-carbon technology projects such as IGCC, concentrated solar power, CCS, CCUS, shale gas, whole range of things. And so I'd ask you to please welcome Ashok.
Thank you, Peter, and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, let me thank SaskPower for having ADB in this symposium. Let me very quickly introduce ADB. It was founded in 1966, and it's headquartered in Manila. It's owned by 67 member countries, and we have 26 country offices. Canada is a founding member and sixth largest shareholder after Japan, US, China, India, and Australia. So we maintain our AAA credit rating, and because of that, we are able to borrow from the market at a very low rate. And we share this benefit with our member countries. ADB provides lending through both public sector and private sector windows. Our public sector operations or loans are generally covered by sovereign guarantee. And because of that, our interest rate is very low, almost at London Interbank official rate, which at the moment is less than 1%. And repayment period is about 25, 26 years for our public sector loan. Private sector window, our loans are determined by the risks of each transaction and vary from project to project. So in 2013, we approved more than $21 billion of financing operations. I think we heard a lot about CCS and why we have to do CCS. This is some of our take on why we should do CCS. I think greenhouse gas emissions are rising despite the world is investing more on renewable than on fossil fuel. So we have crossed that investment tipping point in 2010. And since then, every single year, there is more investment in renewable energy. But emissions are still rising. Investment in fossil fuel, especially in coal, is unabated. Energy intensities are consistently improving, and in case of China, it has improved by more than 24% compared to 2005. But we expect the improvement to be slower as we move forward and we get more complicated reductions and costly reductions. Large capacity of new built coal-fired power plants are expected to come. More than 300 gigawatt, which is more than twice the total installed capacity of Canada, will be all coal-based in the region next 10 to 15 years. And these plants will operate for another 40 years or so. And CCS is the only near commercial technology currently which can cut CO2 emissions from such coal-fired power plants by up to 90%. So if you put all this together, there is a compelling case for doing CCS and doing it now. But having made that case, we still find that there are investment challenges for CCS projects. Very few countries, if any, who has actually embraced CCS in their low-carbon energy portfolio completely and has provided targets or incentives for CCS. Most of the countries we see are waiting, they have adopted a wait-and-see approach. Let's see what happens with CCS and if we really have to do CCS. This is especially true in our region. The carbon prices are low. I mean, this is a critical driver which is needed for CCS to happen. There has to be a price on carbon. Currently, it's very low, or there is no carbon price. And emission constraints which are coming up in only a handful of countries, but not in other countries. So if you put all this together, there is really no commercial case for investment in CCS. Risks are very high, and I will come to that in a minute. What are those risks and why are they high? Which increases the cost of capital and reduces the return on investment. So the market expects government to really provide funding and also to share the risk, or if possible, bear all the risks associated with CCS projects. And what complicates further CCS investments are higher project development cost. I mean, we heard from Mike yesterday that they had to spend $50 million before they come to a stage where they have to decide whether to do the project or not. I mean, this is a phase which is really critical because most of the time this money has to come from a sponsor itself. And that's why the attrition rate, projects failing at this particular stage, is very high for CCS projects. Now, scale of investment. Again, if you look at a coal-fired power plant with CCS, the investment is very similar to what would you do for a wind or a solar projects. But the solar and wind projects are generally 50 to 100 megawatt. The total investments are small compared to a coal-fired power plant with CCS. Investments are in $200 to $300 million upwards. And what further complicates this investment is, if you have an operating coal-fired power plant, and if you try to fit a CCS on it, and you don't have EOR, what it means is that you spend more money and you produce less. And there is no collateral for a bank. So this does not add up for a CCS project. Unfair comparison, I think this is where I have a very strong view that when we talk about a coal-fired power plant with CCS, we compare it with a coal-fired power plant without CCS. And I think this comparison is totally wrong. If we want to compare a coal-fired power plant with CCS, we should compare it with other low-carbon projects. And our assessment is, in case of China, for example, a coal-fired power plant with CCS today is slightly more expensive, and I'm talking in terms of cost of electricity, because that is the real comparison. It's slightly more expensive than wind and a lot less expensive than solar. So CCS today is cost competitive. And perceived risk, I mean, we have done a lot of education and dissemination, but I think there is still very weak understanding of what happens when you inject CO2. And CO2 offtake agreement, I mean, this is a critical bottleneck in our region. It's very hard to make power or industrial plant collaborate with oil companies. So there's very little in terms of CO2 offtake agreement in that part. CCS, and if we go through these risks, these are the issues which come up. I already talked about why there is a lack of commerciality for CCS projects. Revenue risk, I mean, it is unreasonable to expect investor, private sector to underwrite forward carbon prices. Technical risks, I think technology is proven, but not proven in local condition or at a scale it should be. But again, the risks are different from on capture compared to transport and storage. Regulatory risks, I mean, we also heard from Mike yesterday that when they started, there was hardly any regulation. We have to have some basic regulation which should allow project to get approved and capture and transfer CO2 for injection. Counterparty risks, because there are different players involved in capture, and in some cases transport and storage, there are significant counterparty risks. Now, how to improve the risk profile? I think we have to prioritize utilization of captured CO2. So CCUS is important, especially for first-generation demonstration project. And in some cases, especially where there is no precedence of a CO2 offtake agreement, and this is outside North America generally, we have to even incentivize CO2 offtake And this, as I talked about, the project development cost is significant. In our view, this development work should be a part of the project investment decision. What it means is that a bank like us, and we do it, we could advance a project development facility for a sponsor to prepare a project during the early stage. And if within a reasonable time this project does not advance to this investment, or the sponsor decide to walk away, they reimburse the cost. But if project moves forward, then it becomes the part of the overall project financing. So this way you can reduce the risk and do a quality work rather than cutting costs during development stage. And while the early projects have been are financed through capital grant subsidy, in our opinion, these projects to be sustainable over 30, 40 years, they have to reflect some costs in their tariff. That's the only way you can move on with the CCS projects. And basic regulatory framework has to exist with some government support, especially for long-term liability of CO2. So what ADB is doing, and we have not financed a large-scale CCS project yet, but we have established a CCS dedicated fund with contribution from Australia through Global CCS Institute and UK from Department of Energy and Climate Change. And this fund is supporting upstream activities to prepare projects and build a case for CCS in our developing member countries. In some cases, we are supporting CCUS pilot project, and I'll give you an example later of a project in China, and developing roadmap. Sorry, Peter, we still have to do a few roadmaps for demonstration and deployment, and this is especially in case of China. So these are the activities out of this fund. As you can see, there is a very strong focus on China, and it should be. But we have done other work in the region, including making a quick assessment, rapid assessment of CCS, go or no go in Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. We are currently looking at supporting pilot projects in Indonesia and China. So let me very quickly go through what our work are in PRC, which is China. We're working with the government and with the NDRC. Those who are familiar with China will know NDRC, Department of Climate Change, as our main counterpart agency. We have supported all three all three capture technologies: pre-combustion on IGCC with Huaneng, post-combustion on natural gas with Datang, and oxy-fuel combustion with Shenhua on Dongfang boiler. And we are currently finalizing the CCUS roadmap for China. So this is the IGCC project, 250 megawatt at Tianjin, which is the first and so far the only IGCC project of industrial scale in China. So we financed it in 2010. The project is up and running since December 2012. And now we are moving towards doing a pilot CCUS project, capturing about 100,000 tons of CO2 and using it partially for EOR and partially for geological sequestration. So just the CCS roadmap. As you can see, we're working directly with NDRC under their guidance. We have got a range of experts working on this roadmap, helping us to prepare. And most recently, we had a strong stakeholder discussions with major energy players in China to bounce off our recommendations. We expect to launch this roadmap before the end of this year. So what are our key findings are that CCUS is essential to meet the post-2020 anticipated carbon constraint. We did a modeling and we found out that if China does not do CCS and try to come down to the same emission level, it will cost them nearly 1% of GDP. They can do it, but it will come at a very expensive, prohibitively expensive cost. And we also found out there is a high level of readiness for 5 to 10 projects to move towards investment and construction during the 13th five-year plan, which is 2016 to 2020. Coal chemical plants, and I think this is a unique situation for China. Coal chemical plants, in most cases, produce nearly pure CO2 as part of their process. So the capture costs are minimal, less than $5 to $10 per ton. These are early opportunities, especially those coal chemical plants, which are located close to an oil field. And coal chemical plants are also more CO2 intensive than even coal-fired power plants. So they are our first or early opportunity projects. But we have to look at coal-fired power plant, and we expect 2 to 3 coal-fired power plants to go for CCUS within the 13th five-year plan. These are our main recommendations. As I said, there is really no market for CCS. So government has to pull early CCS projects and make them happen. And they can do it by having a specific target. And these projects, if they do within the 13th five-year plan, they can cumulatively store up to 20 million tons of CO2 by 2020. And as I've been talking about the CO2 offtake agreement, we think really this is the critical bottleneck. And government of China should be an honest broker, and in some cases even incentivize the CO2 offtake. Conclusion, I think this is no surprise that public funding is needed for early stage projects. There is no real business case for CCS projects. But CCS financing, and I think this is where it is not only money which should come in, and I'm talking about our region, it has to be a finance plus plus. The first plus is you have to leverage knowledge and expertise from projects like the Boundary Dam projects. And second is you have to leverage other sources of financing, especially commercial financing, so that they know how to finance projects when it comes to CCS. And multilateral development banks like ADB can finance early stage projects and leverage commercial financing. Thank you.